controlled. One of the things I should talk about real quick is thinking about the grain of the wood. You can not really see a ton of the grain in these carving blocks because basswood has very minimal difference between the cellulose and the actual hard part of the grain. But you can think of the grain as being effectively the horizon line. And you'll find that if you're carving sort of against the grain, it's sort of like you're carving uphill. Here's your horizon line. And so if I'm carving this way, I'm doing it the hard way. And you can see I'm getting these ugly chips coming off of my block. I'm going against the grain, I'm going uphill, it's no fun. If I'm carving the correct way, correct is a fuzzy term in this case, but I'll be carving downhill in a way that I'm always going the easy direction. I'm cutting the fibers. You can think of the fibers as sort of a bundle of straw. And if you try and cut them at a diagonal angle in one direction, the straw wants to split apart and the cut isn't very nice. If you're going the other direction, then it all cuts very easily. We have our block and our knife, and that's really all we need at the moment. The main thing that I like to try and do with both tools is when I'm holding them, whatever position I'm holding them, I'm not leaving very much space around the tool. This isn't something where I'm working with my fingertips very much at all. I'm almost always wanting to really envelop the carving knife handle in my hand. I want the wood block really securely in my hand, but I don't want to make myself tired. We're not gripping everything with tons of strength, but we are just wrapping our hands totally around the parts that we're working with so that there's lots of points of contact. First, the mythology of carving, which most people have seen, like the Andy Griffith show or something, and in most television you see carving happening in this sort of whip, 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 whip. It's very kind of chaotic and throwing shavings, and you're carving away from yourself, which all seems very natural, but it's not actually how we carve. We actually carve toward ourselves most of the time. It's very counterintuitive. But the first hand gesture that I want to show is where you wrap the knife in the sort of where your palm meets your fingers, and you roll it into your hand so that the knife blade is effectively facing up toward your shoulder, up the length of your arm. So the sharp part of the blade is facing that way, and it's sort of, I've got this mobility where I've got the handle roughly sort of clamped between my rolled fingers and my palm, like that, because you'll actually use your thumb quite a lot in the way you carve. Carving is about control, and the main thing that I'll teach you all is the more control you have, first, the safer you'll be. The more you'll get exactly what you want out of each cut. And so for our primary way that we approach carving, we'll mostly have the blade facing toward us, and we'll mostly be using our thumb, but we will have wood well between where our thumb is and where our blade is. We're carving like you might carve carrots or something, where you're shaving toward yourself in these kind of ways. And the reason for this is just the geometry of your hand makes this very safe. It's basically impossible to cut yourself this way. If you're doing this correctly, you're rolling sort of facing toward the webbing of your hands, but your blade never gets anywhere near your flesh. And you're effectively both pulling the knife towards your thumb. Your thumb is the strongest part of your hand, and you're also pushing the wood through the blade. And as you practice this is the thing that you'll end up practicing quite a lot, is how to get these nice, smooth chips to come off of your blade. and you are putting your thumb well away from harm's way. There's always a huge amount of wood between you and the actual blade. So not only is this one of the safer ways to carve, but it's also the most effective way to carve, that you're going to have all of the strength of your entire hand, all the strongest parts of your hand are working in concert to do that motion, that you're gently pushing a bit. And as far as how you're holding the wood, it's the same thing. You're holding the wood so that everything, all of your flesh is on the far side, away from where the blade is moving. It's outside of your knife hand. And you're holding it where all your fingers are wrapped pretty solidly around. Then the other thing you're doing is you've got your elbows down at the side of your body. You're making contact with your own rib cage. You want to get everything sort of tight and controlled, all those muscles that are really, sort of the staying warm muscles, the stuff that is very kind of primal about the way we move. Everything that is, we're well sort of engineered, or our structure works best for this kind of carving. So we're doing these cuts that are these little sort of sculpting toward ourselves with the thumb here on the block. One of the things I always like to do, and of course it'll get uncomfortable as you practice this, because eventually you'll build a little bit of a callus from doing this, but putting my thumb on the pointy corner of the wood block that I'm working on, just because it's so much less likely to slip. I get a lot more power down there, and I can carve in this way that is very satisfying and controlled. So this is the primary motion that we're going to be doing throughout the class. I want everybody to just work on that for a while. Just kind of, round off a section of the end of your wood block. Hold it fairly firm. Of course, you can put your hands down on the board if that makes you more comfortable. Get as much kind of contact with the holding hand as you can onto the block, and get as much contact with your carving hand with the handle of the knife. You almost want to have this is called the spine of the blade up here, the side facing away from the sharp part. You want the spine of that blade almost nestled in that first knuckle of your index finger. Because if you're up there pretty close to the backside of the blade, that's where you have the most power. The actual cutting edge of the blade has these three parts. There's sort of the tip here, and then this is called the throat of the blade. This short part, maybe it's 1/2 inch of blade that is right there. That's the most powerful cutting edge on your carving knife. And so if you're mostly carving with the throat of the blade, particularly if it's nice and sharp, then you're going to have the easiest time carving. And you're just, the fibers of the wood are almost like water, and this is a paddle. And if you rotate the paddle in one direction, it goes through the water very stiff. And if you rotate it in the other direction, of course, it just cuts right through the water. And that's how you kind of want to think about it. You also want to get something that's almost like a licking sound of ice cream or something, like a dog licking an ice cream. When you're cutting, you get this sort of slurp, slurp, slurp sound that really indicates that the knife is just sliding through the fibers, and you're not getting any resistance. The sound that you don't want to hear so much is a chattering sound, any kind of vibration. That sound, that's the sound of a blade getting dull. And so using your ears as much as, you know, the strength of your hand and just feeling how the carving works is going to tell you so much about whether you're doing it right or wrong. And again, you know, wrong is a very sort of subjective term in carving. There's efficient and less efficient, and part of less efficient is having to sharpen your blade more often. If you have to continually come back and kind of tune up your blade, then it's good to change your carving style so that you're not harming the blade edge as much. You can carve with any part of the knife. If you're using the tip, you may end up really choking up so that your index finger is actually wrapped around the spine of the blade back here so that you can get power behind the point. Of course, you want to be careful not to wrap your finger totally around where the actual sharp part of the blade is. But when you're doing details, for instance, you're getting in there around the corners of the nose, or you're, you know, getting inside the eyes, or just, you know, any of these really detailed parts, you may end up really just using the tiny tip of the knife and choking up your grip so that you're holding your knife really close, you know, where really your middle finger, index, or ring finger and pinky are all that are holding on to the handle of the knife blade, or the knife handle. I'd love it if everybody can get, you know, these carving blocks basically whittled down to nothing before you come back. Just to keep practicing, because these basic carving things, we're going to move on to the second knife position, but these basic carving things are so important to how the rest of the puppet goes, you know, how satisfying everything feels. Yeah, it's going to hurt your hands. You're going to be using muscles that you are really not used to using. So you will definitely have cramps, and you should take breaks. You will definitely get calluses that you didn't expect to get because you're in contact with you know, the wood is rough and not super pleasant against your skin. And you know, I think the knife handles for Warren Cutlery are really nice. Not sponsored, by the way. I just like them a lot. They're really comfortable, but of course there is this sort of knurled nut on here that will start to irritate your hand as it, you know, is wrapped around that. The spine of the blade, same thing, kind of a rough part. You'll definitely have some soreness as you work with this. Okay, let's move on to the second position that you'll be using all the dang time. Because as much as you're carving toward yourself, you'll also carve away from yourself, but not like, you know, like Andy Griffith, but in this very controlled way. It's exactly the same thing, where I'm going to grip the block in a way where the knife is facing away from the hand that I'm holding the block with. And rather than this sort of, you know, easy elbows out, cartoonish kind of cutting, I'm actually going to have my elbows pretty close to me. I'm going to have my thumb here on the back of the blade, on the spine of the blade, adding power to it. And I want to be in a place where I can have my other thumb wrap over that first thumb to help push. You got it. And so it's pushing. I'm actually using this thumb as a pivot point, and I'm rotating the entire block of wood around that thumb. And that is, again, you want all that control and power. You want to be able to exert nice, steady power. Of course, one of the things about how much force you put into the blade is that it's directly proportional to the kind of injuries you might get. If you're really struggling and pushing hard on your blade and then it goes wrong, that's a worse injury than if you're having this very controlled force. Of course, another thing about that is you want your blade nice and sharp, because a nice sharp blade, it's going to leave a cut that is way less intense. Most of you will get a cut sometime in your carving life. I hope it's not during this early part. I want everybody to really focus and be careful and thoughtful about every cut you make. But every carver cuts themselves. It's just sort of a law of averages. At a certain point, you start getting overconfident and a little bit careless, and you do end up with a cut. And it's so much better to have a nice sharp blade that you can just kind of pinch that cut closed, put a bandage on it, a little bit of Neosporin. 2 or 3 days later, it's totally healed, versus a cut with a dull blade, which leaves kind of a ragged, painful cut that takes weeks to heal and may get infected. So there's all kinds of reasons to keep your knife sharp, not just for the ease of having the knife pass through the wood fibers.
Do you recommend that we get a little sharpening kit?
I think a sharpening kit is a really good idea. I think the main thing you'll want is a strop and a piece of pumice or something, so that you can tune up your blade.
Is that something where if I go into, tractors or whatever, say I need a strop and a pumice?
Yeah, you should be able to get this for about $5 to $7, and this for also about $5 to $7. So
And where did we get that?
Woodcrafters is a great place. That's 212 Southeast 6. Again, hashtag not spawn. I have done carving classes there. They're a really great shop. A lot of the stuff there is pretty expensive. It's not a cheap place, but I was always good at finding the cheapest, reliable thing that they had, because one of the great things about Woodcrafters is nothing they have there is garbage. The lowest end thing will be the medium sort of level of quality.
Oh, that's nice.
So you'll be using these two knife positions quite a lot, and you'll actually, as you're really carving detailed things, you'll end up switching quite a lot from your carving toward yourself to carving away from yourself.
I feel like intuitively obvious when to use which.
Yeah, the fibers are going to tell you that, and that's really so much about practice, because there's these wood fibers going through. Let's look at like a sharp edge of our block, and I'm just going to carve into the center of my block using a cut toward myself. I can't have this come out because it's just going to split the wood. So what I have to do is also carve toward it and meet it in the valley. So I've got to carve toward my cut, or away from me and toward the cut, and I've got to carve toward it in order to complete that valley.
Not cutting down a tree.
Yeah, and except that in this case, it's almost more like an airplane landing, where you think of the place you want to be as the runway, and you're sort of coming down for a landing in one direction, and then rotate around and cut toward it in the other so that it meets nice and smooth on that runway. So that's going to be something that you end up practicing quite a lot. And these are the two primary things that you're going to use all the time. There's just going to be, 80 or 90% of your carving is going to be with these two hand positions. And every time you change your hand position, you're going to take a half second to just think about what I call your escape hatches. And that is, where is your skin if you slip with the knife? When you, say I'm carving sort of toward myself, and I've got my hand position, my holding hand around the block, and then I decide to carve toward, but I don't change my hand position. I need to take that half second to go, actually I'm in the way there. I need to change my hand position. And one of the things that will tell you to do that is you'll realize, oh, if I'm carving in that direction, I don't have my thumb here to give myself that extra power. I need that. And so I want to move my hand position into the safe spot because it's just much more effective. Another thing I want to talk about that if you go into a carving store, most people who are starting wood carving, one of the first things they think that they absolutely need to get is a Kevlar glove for their holding hand. Yeah, I don't recommend Kevlar gloves. The only thing that they will do is teach you all the worst habits. Because of course a Kevlar glove, you can cut yourself, but it's really hard to cut yourself wearing one. But you shouldn't be carving in a way where you are planning on the knife to kind of come to you. You'll start doing a few things with a Kevlar glove. The first thing is Kevlar is slippery. And so you're going to be holding it so much harder to compensate for that slipperiness. That's going to be exhausting, and that exhaustion is going to lead you to have more accidents and injuries. You want to have the carving process be easy. You're gripping the wood mainly by just having lots of skin contact. You're not using a lot of muscle. You're really just, your skin is grippy and the wood is grippy, and the two of those together, you're just enveloping the wood with your holding hand, and you're enveloping the knife handle with your carving hand. And once you put on that glove in between them, then you've got this slippery surface between those two things that's going to be a problem. The other thing, and I used to use carving gloves, one of the first things you start doing is when I'm carving here, I mean, I'm a skilled carver, so I can carve right up to my thumb without worrying about cutting myself. I might start to do that with a carving glove, and that the Kevlar, its purpose is to make sure that knife blade doesn't go through. It dulls knife blades so quick. It's worse than sandpaper. It's worse than anything else I can think of putting your knife blade up against, because every single stroke will just like dull that blade, completely. So I do, just like if you're cutting carrots, where you cut your bring the knife blade all the way up to touch the pad of your thumb. Of course, it helps to have a little bit of callus and have been doing this for a while. I'm definitely not recommending this for early carvers. You shouldn't be carving to touch your skin at this point. But as you get more skilled, as you get more comfortable, that will be a useful technique for certain things, to be able to kind of carefully use that as a gentle stop. But that's for when you have lots and lots of control and you've really built up the muscles in your hands and things like that. So we'll stay away from carving gloves so that they don't teach you any bad habits and don't dull your blade and don't exhaust you. Another thing I'll point out is as we get into detail carving, just as I said with the other hand position, where you will get to a point where you choke up quite a bit, where your index finger is sort of wrapped around the spine of your blade and you're just dealing with the point. You'll do the same kind of thing when you're carving away from yourself. You have this position where your thumb is resting on the spine of the blade and you've got your other thumb pressed against it, and you're doing these really tight little detail carvings where you're just dealing with the point of your carving knife. You're just getting in there tight. Maybe I'll turn my piece around and I'll get a little tight detailed cut.
Get really thin slivers that way, huh?
You can get lots of detail with this. And one of the things that you're looking to try and accomplish is to part those fibers as efficiently as possible, to have not a lot of roughness left over. Nice, smooth, buttery carve or chips that you're removing from the block of wood. You'll just kind of get some practice in with that. This carving block will serve another purpose, which is, and you know, if you guys whittle away your carving block to nothing by next week, you can get more. Don't worry, there's more wood. But this is used a lot of the time for when you're not ready to do a detail on your actual puppet. You want to carve a nose, but you're worried that you're just going to shave the nose right off the face. So you've got this practice block to try and do 2 or 3 noses on the practice block before you get to actually carving the face. And we're going to get into the other 2 knife positions pretty soon. Again, what you guys have been doing is most of everything, shaping your bodies, getting all of your long lines done, but you can't do the entire puppet with these 2 cuts. Eventually you have to get into some of these real detailed things. And so we're going to talk about holding the knife like a pencil. You kind of start with this pencil position with your pinky out, you know, but you're going to end up choking up a little bit, getting a couple of fingers onto the actual side of the blade. I'm actually going to get to this point where I've got my middle finger resting against the face of the blade and my index finger on the top of the spine of the blade and my thumb right there on that knurled nut. And this is where I want to use the carving board, the lip board, because this is how I'm going to do details into the surface of my wood. I'm going to use pressure against it, and I'm going to use either my pinky or my ring finger as something where I'm touching the wood. You got it, yeah. Pinky and ring finger contacting the wood surface. And this is what, you know, people talk about a pen knife, you know, where they're literally talking about something that looks like a ballpoint pen, but it's actually a knife. This is sort of where it comes from, this type of carving, where you're carving directly into the surface. You're basically drawing your lines on there, but you're doing them at an angle. You're drawing a cut into your wood, and then you're rotating around, and you're cutting from the other side until you remove a little sort of 3-sided sliver out of the surface. And I'll show you guys what this looks like. Let me do one that is relatively long that kind of indicates what we're approaching. And this is a type of cut where you want to be sure that you're always putting your holding hand far away from the path of the blade. I'm going to grip from the back as I pull the blade through the block, and I'll remove this nice long chip. I'm showing for the camera because this will be on the video that you guys get.